There are signs, my friends, that the Avatar Netflix series might be good. And this is my beautiful cat, Momo, who I'm not at all using to subliminally influence you to like the video because of the beautiful cat and to go over to my Patreon and support me there and support the cat. Yes. And her little booties. Her little booties. Don't you want to support these and like these? Like the video. Netflix's live-action One Piece was recently released, and apparently it, quote, broke the live-action anime curse. But what does that actually mean, and what can we maybe learn about how they're managing Avatar? Because Netflix seems to be taking the same kind of media strategy with Avatar as it did with One Piece, where they really emphasize that the people making the series, the directors, the actors, the musicians, love the original material and want to stay loyal to it. You look at the interviews done with the writers and creators of One Piece, and they're constantly, one, praising the original manga, and two, talking about how careful they were with changing things. Now, right up front, I am someone who prefers loyal adaptations, okay? I like that when I sit down to watch something, I can see the story that I've come to love and that I can share that with other people in a new way. It's not Shakespeare, I'm just not normally that interested in seeing a different version of the story. There are exceptions, but it's very rare for the story to be better or become its own thing in its own way. Like House of the Dragon is a pretty loyal adaptation, but they are making changes which I think really fit naturally with the book, and they understand the material in a way that they can change it organically. But come on, I have had, and I'm sure you have too, way too many books that I adore turned into, well, there's really no other word for it, abominations. I don't even know which one is the worst. Okay, maybe I do, but tell me down below, which was the worst adaptation for you personally, that when you sat down, you just started to boil with fury and hatred? You're like, why would you do it like this? What was your movie or game or whatever adaptation that made you feel like that? And if I was to guess, I would say Netflix is banking on that feeling a little bit. Like the marketing strategy that they're doing, it's intentional. It's always intentional. And it seems to be working, with One Piece becoming one of Netflix's most watched series ever, like full stop ever, breaking records set by Stranger Things and Wednesday. And in fact, Avatar and One Piece are both one of the most expensive shows Netflix has ever produced too, at around $15 to $17 million an episode. Only Stranger Things season 4 coming close. So they are really gambling on people loving this series. They have a lot of faith in it, it seems. And for context, Game of Thrones at its height only got to around like $15 million per episode. It's honestly a little hard to get how expensive this stuff is, but I do want to note that it being super expensive does not necessarily mean it'll look that great. Like, Wheel of Time is one of the most expensive fantasy series like ever made. It's more expensive than most of Game of Thrones was, but to be perfectly honest, it looks pretty budget a lot of the time. Like, it looks like some of the early 2000s kind of fantasy stuff in some moments. I don't know what it is, but like my wife and I were sitting down, we're watching, we're like, the set looks very clearly like polystyrene type stuff in places. So it's not a guarantee it'll work, but what does it mean to be loyal, right? If you want to claim to be loyal to the book, what does that actually mean? Well, number one, it follows the story. Now, I have not seen the original anime or read the manga, despite thousands of people in the comments telling me that I need to, and you're welcome to continue telling me to for that extra sweet engagement. But my editor Lalit and the fanbase online seems to agree that the One Piece live action is pretty accurate, it's pretty loyal, follows the story. Apparently it does summarize, because there are 1075 episodes of One Piece, but apparently there's a lot of filler anyway, and it does follow the story. Now, interestingly, Netflix's Avatar is not gonna need to summarize, because if you take the entire runtime of Season 1 as they've got it planned, they'll have around 480 minutes to cover Book 1 Water. Now, Book 1 Water actually only comes in at around 460 minutes, so even if they matched it minute for minute, they would have more time left over. So we're not going to see any of this nonsense compression and summarizing and terrible exposition, or at least I hope. We don't know, but I hope that we did in M. Night Shyamalan's film which shall not be named. What we will see, however, and I'll be willing to put money on this, is a change in structure. So The Last Airbender was written for a time when mid-episode ads were a thing, half-an-hour slots were a thing, episodic storytelling was the norm, where you were meant to be able to drop in and drop out with any given episode. It's like part of the reason we got so much of the Great Divide, because they could just put that anywhere and it stands on its own. But I could see this when I watched the live-action One Piece. What they did was they melded stories and blended them to make them maybe flow better, or to bring in characters earlier and keep them around for longer, so they don't have to just be around for like one episode at a time. Arcs can take the time they need to, because they don't need to fit it into this specific half-hour slot, you know, anymore. And they're almost definitely going to do the same with Avatar. And I actually support this, because as much as I love the series, you know, there are weaknesses to the episodic framework that adapting it into kind of this more longer form storytelling that people watch all the way through can mend, it can fix. We can tell a little by the soundtrack and episode and casting. I'm going to do a whole big video breaking down exactly what the order of the story is and what they're going to cover and stuff like that. But we already have a pretty good idea that characters like the Kyoshi Warriors, Boomy, probably Azula are going to play a bigger role than they originally did in season 1, which makes sense because they're recurring characters that were kind of limited by the structure when it originally came out. You know, Azula doesn't even appear until season 2. And before you say it, I know she briefly appears in The Storm in the Siege of the North Part 2, but she had no lines. You get what I mean. Like, the Kyoshi Warriors were forced to stick to that one kind of 23-minute episode, but we have a whole hour-long episode called Warriors now, which will probably give them a bit more room to breathe. Azula doesn't appear till season 2, but I reckon we're probably going to see a lot more flashbacks with Zuko's childhood, where she can play a bit more of a role to really set her up for the season to come. When I talk about wanting a loyal adaptation, I am not talking about needing to keep all of these chapters in a 23-minute framework where the exact lines are said in the exact same way that they were originally. Or that the Kyoshi Warriors can only be around for those 22 minutes before they come back at the certain time designated. And I don't think anyone who actually likes loyal adaptations does think that way. We're talking about what the Kyoshi Warriors do for Sokka's arc, his sexism that as a result of his father leaving him behind and trying to step into boots he cannot fill, and what that does to his relationship with his sister, Katara, who, you know, is forced to take on a motherly role after their mother was killed. And I mean, when adapting books into live action, it's often impossible to, you know, put whole conversations that were in the book into the film. They're often just way too long, you know, so they instead have to figure out what matters, what's important, keeping the real ideas behind it. And there are lines and shots and moments and scenes which they need to keep really accurate if they want to talk about being loyal to the series, you know? I don't think I want to see a different take on, like, Zuko coming back to Iroh and Iroh telling him, I was never angry with you, I was only afraid that you had lost your way. You know, I don't think that needs to be changed. That line matters, but a lot of it can be changed and is very flexible. Of course, I do want them to follow the plot too, and if we look at the episode titles, it does suggest, at least, that they are going from the South Pole to Kyoshi Island to Omashu to meeting Roku in the Spirit World in the Fire Nation to the Blue Spirit to the Northern Water Tribe. But of course, you could argue that M. Night Shyamalan's kinda story followed that rough structure as well. But all this is because it's not enough to just follow the plot beats, the bullet points of the story. You need to also understand the spirit of the story and work with that. It's not enough just to give us exact moments, exact lines, exact shots, exact beats from the original story, but understanding why those beats mattered and which beats mattered. You know, Shyamalan's The Last Airbender has a ton of shots and lines directly from the original series, but none of the context that made them meaningful. I talked about that in my big video on it, but it's got to be more than a superficial tribute to what the original thing looked like, right? It's not that Katara has the necklace, but that the necklace is from her mother. And apparently, One Piece fans tell me that the Netflix show managed to do this for them. And I think that's what they're going to try and do for Avatar 2. And I will say, you can kind of feel that when you watch the One Piece live action series. Hey, who knows? maybe they will try to get everything right and still butcher it. We don't know. Like, Netflix has also produced series which do not follow the original story much at all, but the people involved claimed to be super loyal to it for a while, and that angered a lot of people. Tell me down below, what would you be most gutted if it was missed, if it was taken out, if it was butchered in this series? So yeah, I want them to follow the story, but there are things that I want them to get exactly right. But I also understand that there are going to be structural and kind of scene changes that may make it better for this new format. And there are definitely things I would like to see their take on, to experiment with. I'd love to see their take on bending, especially because they're working with an entirely different technology. And the creators originally did say that they wanted bending to be more elaborate and flashier, but the technology at the time just really wasn't up for it, the budget that they had. Like, the stuff in Legend of Korra is actually a lot more like what they originally intended. I would actually like to see a new take on the soundtrack, which might be a bit of a hot take, but Takeshi Furukawa is an incredible composer and has done some amazing stuff. And I think that even though I love the original soundtrack, they could do something new that is just as emotive, you know? And again, you know, giving Kyoshi Warriors and stuff a bit more room to breathe could be interesting. It's a hard balance to strike, but let me know your thoughts down below. And lastly, and this is kind of superficial, but it is something that I think really does matter, you know, at least on kind of a personal level. It's gotta look like the story. This was something that definitely stood out to me when I was watching One Piece. Like, I was looking at it and go, oh yeah, no, these guys look like they're from the story that it's adapting, right? Characters looked like anime characters. They talked like anime characters. They moved with the exaggeration and unreality that being animated allows and normalizes. Now, I'd be lying if I said it sometimes wasn't hard to look at, because I was watching and I could see that they were wearing costumes. And of course they're wearing costumes. Like, I know they're wearing costumes, but I don't want to be thinking about them wearing costumes. It wasn't quite as immersive. And this is part of the difficulty with adapting live action from, you know, anime or animated materials, is that the color palette, the clothes, it can look a little clunky sometimes. And we see they're trying to do the same sort of thing with Avatar. You know, you look at their costumes and I don't know how it's going to look on the live action screen when I see it. We'll have to see. I mean, a lot of live action does end up like toning down the colors and style of the animated series to make it look more, quote, normal or whatever. Shyamalan made everything gray and brown, even Aang, because, I mean, he didn't want that look. But, you know, so far the costumes we've got are bright and vibrant. They've got that saturation. And I think they need a bit of age and wear and tear to not feel like a costume. But there is nothing to say that high color, high saturation, you know, color palettes and visuals don't work. You know, Guardians of the Galaxy has always been like that, and it looks pretty normal. You know, it's fun to watch. It's a strain on the eyes or anything. And we recently just had the D&D, Dungeons and Dragons movie, which again was high color, high saturation, and it looked fantastic. And we've just had some new photos released of Iroh, Ozai, Azula, and Zhao, and unironically, they look pretty damn good. Unlike the film that shall not be named, they have color and life in them. They channel the spirit of the original design, even if they're not identical to what we exactly saw in the original show. I think these are an example of good changes which remain loyal to the show, looking accurate, but understanding where visual changes need to be made, or can be made. Yeah, I think that One Piece might have been visually a little over the top for me, but it also doesn't help that the original anime and manga are exactly like that in the first place. Bottom line, we're gonna have to see if it grates on me when it comes out. But there is another question behind all of this. A question which is a little bit hidden. Does this approach make it good? I know it feels easy to say, well, if they're loyal to the original story is good, and so the adaptation will be good. And this isn't entirely wrong. One of the advantages of adaptations is that you kind of get to take from a story that you know has already been successful, so kind of why would you change it in many ways? But following the story on a beat-by-beat basis is still only one small part of a big, complex moving machine of acting, directing, scripting, animation, music, pacing, framing, marketing, And a lot of things can go wrong inside that, even if you follow the story technically. It can be the wrong priorities, the wrong framing, and some things that might be loyal may not adapt well to a new medium. The easy example is a lot of animated humor, which works well in the animated medium, but translate that to live action and it looks pretty awkward. Comedy is different in different mediums because of the capacities and abilities of different mediums. Comedy is different in stand-up as it is to TV, as it is to music and animation. So this might be a way to ensure fans of the original series enjoy it, promote it, sell it to others, buy it, share it. You know, if you want to be cynical, you can look at it as just a marketing tactic. That it's more about just making what people will uncritically love and watch than because it's good on its own. Like, when I was watching One Piece, a small of me felt that, yeah, I'm enjoying this, but I could see the limitations and cracks of trying to be so loyal. But even so, I prefer loyal adaptations. That's how we got The Lord of the Rings. And you watch the background footage and, you know, back behind the scenes stuff of Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh talking about how they were scripting, and they're very conscious of trying to bring about Tolkien's vision. And I like that. I love that. Because suddenly it feels like I am not only sharing something I love with the people around me in a new way, but I'm sharing something I love with the people who actually created it in the first place. Or, you know, that we both share that love for it. And again, this is not to say you can't experiment or do things differently. One of my favorite films of all time, Blade Runner, is heavily changed from Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. It's virtually an entirely different story, and it's phenomenal. Another of my favorite films, Arrival, adds a lot to the short story that it came from, but it's incredible. But I'm curious about your thoughts on loyalty. However, there is one major difference we need to bring up between Netflix's One Piece and Netflix's Avatar: the creators. With One Piece, the original author Oda is on board and has been consulted a lot. With Avatar, the original creators Mike DiMartino and Brian Konietzko left the project in 2020 with the following statement: "We were hired as executive producers and showrunners. Netflix said it was committed to honoring our vision of this retelling and supporting us on creating the series. Unfortunately, things did not go as we hoped." Then in another statement, "There was no follow-through. It was a negative and non-supportive environment. This was not a simple matter of us not getting our way. We did not need all the ideas to come from us. As long as we felt the ideas were in line with the spirit and integrity of Avatar, we would have happily embraced them. However, we ultimately came to the belief that we would not be able to meaningfully guide the direction of the series." Those are some pretty damning words. It seems that Netflix wanted the original creators on board in exactly the same way, and it just didn't work out. And I know that you might narrow in on the spirit and integrity of Avatar, because if it doesn't have that, what does it have? And that means it's automatically going to be terrible. But just remember that behind the scenes stuff is complicated, and people leave creative projects for all sorts of reasons. Personal, monetary, vision, clashes, timelines, editorial, you know, and from the outside it can look like one thing, but it might be a whole myriad of things all together that we may not just be able to see and understand, really. And more than that, Mike and Brian were the creators, but they were only two of the writers. And they were not responsible for some of the best ideas in the series, like Zuko's character arc. Many of the best episodes and ideas like that came from Aaron Haas and Elizabeth Welch, who wrote some of the best episodes, like Zuko Alone, The Southern Raiders, and The Day of Black Sun. So while that statement does make me skeptical, can make you skeptical, I just don't want to put too much faith in a vague statement without specifics when I haven't seen the project, and I know that behind the scenes stuff can fall apart for a whole bunch of reasons. I just don't want to put too much emphasis on it. I know a lot of people feel that this whole idea is just unnecessary, and I get that, right? You know, why make it at all? I'm not roaring for it myself. I am curious is probably the best word. I would like to see a good adaptation. It'd feel like it's kind of replaces the, 2010 nightmare. I don't know if it'll work, and I don't know if it even has the potential to kind of go down in history as an incredible show on its own, independent of the original series. But it is coming. There is no stopping it. February 2024. And I guess for me, it's just going to be an interesting thing to see to come. I'm cautious, but interested, especially to see a trailer, which will probably be coming sometime soon. So tell me down below, what does being loyal mean to you? What do you definitely need to have in this series? What are you afraid that they'll miss out or they'll butcher? Let me know down below. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.